What if tornadoes no longer stayed confined to Tornado Alley? What if states that once thought themselves safe are now seeing twisters touch down with terrifying frequency? And what if the map of American tornado risk is being redrawn before our very eyes, raising questions about whether communities across the nation are truly prepared for the storms of tomorrow? For decades, the central US, stretching from Texas through Oklahoma, Kansas, and into Nebraska, was known as Tornado Alley. It was the region most often associated with the violent, spiraling columns of wind that tear apart towns, uproot lives, and leave paths of destruction that can stretch for miles. But in recent years, meteorologists and disaster analysts have noticed something remarkable. Tornadoes are no longer limited to that traditional corridor. They are increasingly appearing in states farther east, south, and even north. From Mississippi to Indiana, from Kentucky to Tennessee, tornado outbreaks are rewriting the geography of risk. The question is, why? What forces are driving this shift? And what does it mean for millions of Americans who may have never imagined a tornado ripping through their backyard? To answer this, we must look at the interplay between climate, geography, and human settlement patterns. Historically, Tornado Alley earned its name because of a unique collision of atmospheric ingredients. Warm, moist air surges northward from the Gulf of Mexico, colliding with cooler, drier air sweeping down from the Rockies and Canada. Add in strong jet stream winds aloft, and the conditions were primed for supercells, massive thunderstorms capable of spawning tornadoes. But while those dynamics still exist, the atmosphere itself is changing. Warmer overall temperatures mean moisture is traveling farther north and east than before. The jet stream, influenced by a warming Arctic, is shifting and dipping in new patterns, creating instability in places that once saw fewer outbreaks. In the southeast, this has had profound consequences. States like Alabama and Mississippi now experience some of the deadliest tornadoes in the country. Unlike the open plains of Kansas, where storms are easier to spot and track, the southeast is covered in trees, hills, and urban sprawl. That makes tornadoes harder to see and harder to warn against. It also means that when storms strike, they often hit populated areas with devastating results. In fact, studies have shown that tornado fatalities are disproportionately higher in the south compared to the plains, precisely because of these geographic and demographic differences. Population growth is another factor. In the mid-20th century, much of the land vulnerable to tornadoes in the South and Midwest was rural. Today, cities and suburbs have sprawled outward, putting more people and infrastructure directly in harm's way. The same tornado that might have torn up farmland 50 years ago now cuts across highways, schools, and housing developments. This magnifies the destruction and raises the stakes. At the same time, tornado reporting has become more sophisticated. Decades ago, many weaker tornadoes in remote areas went undocumented. Now, with Doppler radar, storm chasers, and social media, nearly every tornado leaves a record. This makes it seem as if tornadoes are more frequent, but in reality, it is the clustering and geographic spread that stand out. Scientists are particularly concerned about tornado outbreaks, when multiple tornadoes occur in a single region over a short period of time. In the past 2 decades, such outbreaks have become more common, and they increasingly occur outside traditional Tornado Alley. Another important dimension is timing. Tornadoes used to be thought of as a springtime phenomenon, peaking in May and June. But in recent years, significant outbreaks have occurred in December, January, and February, particularly in the south. This means tornadoes are no longer confined to a predictable season. Families who once prepared for storms in the spring now face year-round risk with little warning. The emotional toll of this unpredictability is immense, as people live in constant fear that the next storm could arrive outside the usual calendar of disasters. Climate change is not directly creating tornadoes, but it is altering the conditions that make them more or less likely. Warmer air holds more moisture, fueling more powerful thunderstorms. Shifts in wind shear and instability patterns create new hotspots for storm development. While scientists caution that tornado science is complex, more so than hurricanes or floods, the trend is clear. The geography of risk is expanding. This expansion is what alarms both scientists and emergency managers. The consequences extend beyond science. Building codes in the Midwest have historically accounted for tornado risks, with more homes built with basements or storm shelters. In the Southeast, however, such measures are less common, leaving communities more exposed. When tornadoes strike areas unprepared for them, casualties are often higher. Insurance systems, too, are under strain. Regions that once saw low tornado claims are now facing mounting damages, reshaping how companies assess and price risk. This could leave homeowners in newly vulnerable states struggling to afford coverage. For families, the changing tornado map has transformed daily life. In towns across Tennessee and Kentucky, schools now run tornado drills with the same intensity as fire drills. Parents invest in weather radios and apps to receive late-night alerts, because many deadly tornadoes in the South strike after dark, when people are asleep. Community resilience has improved, but the anxiety of living under constant threat has grown. The cultural shift is profound. States that once considered tornadoes a distant problem now treat them as part of their identity. Media coverage has also adapted. While the iconic images of wide-open plains and storm chasers still dominate pop culture, increasingly, footage from suburban neighborhoods in Georgia or apartment complexes in Arkansas tell a new story. This reframes tornadoes from being a spectacle of nature to being a widespread societal threat. It is no longer about the lonely funnel cloud over farmland. It is about destruction in communities where millions live. Emergency management agencies are scrambling to adapt. The National Weather Service has invested in more Doppler radar sites, expanded warning systems, and worked to reduce false alarms that might cause complacency. Still, the challenge of reaching people in minutes, sometimes seconds, remains immense. The difference between life and death can hinge on whether a warning arrives in time and whether people trust and act on it. Trust is fragile in communities that feel neglected or misunderstood, particularly rural towns where past warnings failed. There is also the challenge of equity. As with hurricanes and floods, disasters reveal existing inequalities. Low-income families often live in mobile homes, which are particularly vulnerable to tornadoes. Access to underground shelters is uneven, and evacuating in time requires resources not everyone has. When tornadoes expand into new states, these inequalities follow, often magnifying suffering among the poorest. In thinking about why tornadoes are appearing in more states, one cannot ignore the broader context of a warming planet. The same forces that intensify hurricanes, wildfires, and floods are also reshaping tornado risk. America is, in many ways, chasing a moving target, building systems and strategies based on old patterns, even as those patterns evolve. The story of tornado expansion is a story of adaptation, of whether the nation can keep pace with the accelerating shifts of a climate in flux. Ultimately, the spread of tornadoes is not just a meteorological phenomenon. It is a societal challenge that touches on science, policy, economics, and culture. It forces us to ask hard questions. Can infrastructure evolve quickly enough? Can emergency systems reach everyone in time? Can insurance and housing systems adapt without leaving millions behind? And most importantly, can communities foster resilience in the face of storms that no longer respect old boundaries? The answer lies not only in understanding the atmosphere, but in understanding ourselves. Tornadoes may be natural phenomena, but the devastation they leave is shaped by human choices, where we build, how we prepare, and whether we heed the lessons of history. The widening tornado map of America is both a warning and a call to action, demanding that the nation rethink safety, not as a regional issue, but as a national one. In the storms of tomorrow, no state can afford to think of tornadoes as someone else's problem. They are everyone's problem now. The shift in America's tornado landscape is one of the most striking developments in modern meteorology. Once regarded as a regional problem, tied tightly to the flat prairies of the central United States, tornadoes are now showing up in places that historically felt immune. Families in Kentucky, Tennessee, and even parts of the mid-Atlantic now speak of twisters the way Oklahomans or Kansans once did. This broadening of risk raises important questions about the mechanics of tornado formation, the role of a changing climate, and the vulnerabilities of communities caught off guard by their arrival. To truly understand why tornadoes appear to be spreading into more states, one must look at the convergence of science, geography, and human development. Tornado Alley was once the undisputed heart of America's twister activity. Spanning from northern Texas through Oklahoma, Kansas and Nebraska, this region's atmospheric recipe was ideal. Hot, humid air from the Gulf of Mexico colliding with cold, dry air from Canada and the Rockies, mixed with powerful jet stream winds aloft. That collision zone produced supercells, the rotating thunderstorms most likely to spawn tornadoes. For decades, this region bore the brunt of the nation's tornado headlines, reinforcing a mental map that tornadoes belonged out west on the plains. But over time, meteorologists began to notice that while tornadoes still occurred in Tornado Alley, the frequency and intensity were creeping eastward. This eastward shift has been documented in numerous scientific studies. One key factor is moisture. Warmer global temperatures mean the atmosphere holds more water vapor, and this Gulf moisture is penetrating farther north and east than it did historically. Storm systems that once fizzled before reaching Tennessee or Georgia now arrive supercharged, primed to spin. Coupled with jet stream patterns altered by Arctic warming, the new alignment creates storm systems in areas that once saw fewer outbreaks. For residents, the result is more frequent encounters with tornadoes where none were expected. The Southeast in particular has become a hotspot for devastating tornadoes. Alabama, Mississippi, and Arkansas have endured some of the deadliest outbreaks of the past 2 decades. The tragedy lies not only in the storm's power, but in the region's landscape and demographics. Unlike the open plains of Kansas, where tornadoes can be seen approaching from miles away, the South is full of forests, rolling hills, and dense development. Visibility is poor, making tornadoes harder to spot. Many strike at night, catching families asleep. Population density amplifies the risks. Storms that cut across urban centers cause exponentially more damage than those that rip through farmland. These factors combine to make southern tornadoes particularly lethal, even if they are not always the strongest by meteorological standards. Another dimension is seasonality. Tornadoes were once associated mainly with spring, peaking in April, May, and June. Today, significant tornadoes strike during what was once considered off-season. December and January outbreaks have shocked communities, shattering the belief that tornadoes hibernate during the winter months. The Christmas tornado outbreak of recent years, which swept across multiple southern states, left scars not just in buildings, but in cultural memory. Families now understand that tornadoes can arrive at any time, adding psychological weight to the threat. This unpredictability underscores how atmospheric shifts are dismantling old patterns and replacing them with uncertainty. The question of whether tornadoes are becoming more numerous overall is complex. On one hand, improved reporting means more tornadoes are documented than in the past, especially weaker ones. Decades ago, a small tornado in a rural field might never have been recorded. Today, radar, satellite imagery, storm chasers, and citizen reports ensure even minor events are logged. However, the clustering of tornadoes, multiple funnels forming in one outbreak, has clearly increased. Scientists have documented that while the total number of tornado days may be decreasing, the number of tornadoes per outbreak day is rising. In other words, when tornadoes do occur, they tend to come in swarms, overwhelming communities and emergency systems. Human settlement patterns also play a critical role. America's population has shifted significantly since the mid-20th century, with more people moving into the Sun Belt and the Southeast. Suburbs have sprawled across formerly rural areas, and mobile homes dot landscapes vulnerable to high winds. This means more people and more property are directly in tornado paths. A tornado that once tore through open farmland now shreds subdivisions, schools, and shopping centers. The rising cost of damages reflects not only storm intensity, but also the expansion of human exposure. Building practices further highlight disparities. In the plains, basements and storm shelters are common, partly due to cultural awareness of tornado risk. In the south, basements are less practical because of the water table, and storm shelters are far less common. Many residents live in mobile homes, which are especially vulnerable. This structural vulnerability contributes to higher casualty rates in the southeast compared to Tornado Alley. As tornadoes spread into states with weaker building codes and fewer protective measures, the toll of each outbreak increases. Emergency preparedness has improved since the early 2000s. The National Weather Service now issues tornado warnings with greater lead times, and smartphone alerts bring warnings directly to millions of people. Yet technology cannot overcome all challenges. Nighttime tornadoes remain the deadliest because sleeping families may not hear or respond in time. Language barriers, digital divides, and warning fatigue from false alarms also undermine the effectiveness of alerts. Trust is critical. If people do not believe a warning is urgent, they may ignore it, with fatal consequences. Insurance and economic resilience also shape how communities experience tornadoes. As tornadoes expand into new regions, insurers adjust their risk models. Premiums rise, coverage shrinks, and in some cases companies pull out entirely. Families already stretched financially may opt for minimal coverage, leaving them unable to rebuild after a storm. This creates cycles of poverty and displacement that magnify disaster impacts. Tornadoes are not just meteorological phenomena. They are catalysts for economic instability when communities lack robust safety nets. Culturally, the expansion of tornado risk has reshaped local identities. In parts of Tennessee and Kentucky, tornado sirens and drills have become as ingrained as they are in Oklahoma. Schools practice duck and cover exercises, churches reinforce basements, and community centers double as shelters. Yet the cultural adjustment is uneven. Many still cling to outdated assumptions that tornadoes don't happen here, even as outbreaks prove otherwise. Overcoming complacency is one of the greatest challenges for public safety officials. Looking forward, scientists remain cautious about attributing every change in tornado geography to climate change. Tornado formation is highly sensitive to localized atmospheric dynamics, and long-term data is more limited than for hurricanes or floods. Still, the broader trends, warmer air, more moisture, shifting jet streams, are consistent with climate change's fingerprints. If current patterns continue, the 21st century may see tornadoes becoming less of a regional quirk and more of a nationwide hazard. The implications are profound. Infrastructure designed for one climate regime may prove inadequate in another. Emergency response systems may be overwhelmed by larger outbreaks. Economic systems, from insurance to disaster aid, may buckle under rising claims. And communities may face the agonizing question of whether to rebuild in places that seem destined to be struck again. The comparison between old Tornado Alley and today's shifting tornado belt is more than academic. It is a matter of survival for millions of Americans. Understanding why tornadoes are appearing in more states means acknowledging the convergence of climate shifts, population growth, economic vulnerability, and cultural readiness. It means recognizing that disasters are never natural in isolation. They are the product of hazards colliding with human systems, and it is those systems that determine whether storms become tragedies. The storms of tomorrow will not respect old boundaries. They will not pause at the edge of Kansas or spare cities unaccustomed to twisters. They will follow the laws of physics in a world reshaped by human influence, finding new targets in new places. To adapt, America must update its mental map of tornado risk, expand preparedness efforts beyond the plains, and confront the uncomfortable truth that every state is now part of the tornado story. Whether that story ends in resilience or ruin depends on choices made today, in how we build, how we prepare, and how seriously we take the warnings that nature is already delivering. When we think of tornadoes, the mind often flashes to the iconic images of storm chasers in Oklahoma or Kansas, filming towering funnels as they spin across flat, open farmland. That cinematic picture has long defined America's relationship with tornadoes, but the reality in 2025 is much more complicated and far more unsettling. Tornadoes are no longer a phenomenon confined to Tornado Alley. They are emerging in more states than ever before, and their spread is reshaping how Americans live, prepare, and survive. The central question is not whether tornadoes are increasing in number, it's whether they are appearing in places where communities are unprepared, leaving new regions of the country facing risks they never expected. This shift has enormous consequences for public safety, infrastructure, economics, and culture, demanding a new understanding of what it means to live in a tornado-prone nation. At the heart of this transformation is the changing atmosphere itself. Tornadoes form under very specific conditions. Warm, moist air at the surface colliding with cold, dry air above, all under the influence of strong wind shear. In the past, these ingredients came together most often in the Central Plains. But with warmer global temperatures, moist Gulf air is penetrating farther east and north than ever before, carrying energy into regions that once saw far fewer tornadoes. Add in the jet stream's shifting patterns, influenced by a warming Arctic, and you have the perfect recipe for instability in places that historically did not expect it. Scientists stop short of saying climate change directly causes tornadoes, but most agree that it is altering the playing field on which these storms develop, expanding the potential strike zone across much of the United States. The Southeast has become the most striking example of this shift. States like Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, and Tennessee now face some of the nation's deadliest tornadoes. Geography is one reason why. In Kansas or Oklahoma, tornadoes can often be spotted from miles away across flat plains, giving people more time to respond. In the Southeast, hills, trees, and urban density obstruct views, making tornadoes harder to see and track. Many tornadoes also strike after dark, leaving families asleep and vulnerable. The results can be catastrophic. Entire neighborhoods destroyed in minutes, families caught unprepared, and casualty rates that outpace those in Tornado Alley. For survivors, the fear is not just of the storm itself, but of the unpredictability that now comes with living in a region where tornadoes can arrive at any time of year, including the dead of winter. Seasonality is another dimension of the story. Tornadoes were once considered primarily a springtime threat, peaking in April, May, and June. Today, outbreaks have been recorded in December, January, and February, particularly in the south. This extension of the tornado season transforms how families prepare. Instead of bracing for storms in one part of the year, they must remain vigilant year-round. Schools now run tornado drills in months once thought safe, and communities invest in shelters that are open every season. The cultural shift is profound. Tornadoes are no longer a seasonal nuisance, but a constant presence in people's lives, eroding the sense of security that comes with predictable patterns. Population growth compounds the problem. Many of the regions now seeing more tornadoes have experienced explosive development over the last 2 decades. Suburbs sprawl outward into areas once dominated by farmland or forests. Mobile home parks and subdivisions have sprung up across the southeast and Midwest, placing thousands of families directly in harm's way. A tornado that might once have torn through empty fields now shreds shopping malls, highways, and housing developments. The cost of damages has skyrocketed, not only because storms may be stronger, but because more people and infrastructure now stand in the path. For insurance companies, this shift has triggered alarm. Premiums are climbing, coverage is shrinking, and in some states, insurers are withdrawing altogether. Homeowners who thought they were safe from tornado risk now find themselves unprotected financially as well as physically. Preparedness varies widely across regions. In the Midwestern plains, basements and storm shelters are common. Families pass down tornado safety culture from generation to generation, teaching children from a young age how to take cover. In the southeast and east, basements are rare, shelters are less common, and the cultural memory of tornadoes is thinner. This creates gaps in survival rates when storms strike. In some cases, communities that never expected tornadoes have no siren systems, no shelters, and no disaster plans in place. Emergency management agencies are racing to catch up, but the learning curve is steep, and the consequences of being unprepared can be fatal. Technology has improved dramatically since the early 2000s. Doppler radar can detect rotation within storms more effectively, and smartphone alerts bring warnings directly to millions of people. Social media allows communities to share information instantly, and storm chasers provide real-time reports from the ground. Yet challenges remain. Tornado warnings still often provide only minutes of lead time, and false alarms can breed complacency. Nighttime tornadoes are especially deadly, as people may sleep through alerts. Trust in warning systems is uneven, particularly in rural areas where past warnings did not always match local experiences. Technology is powerful, but it cannot fully overcome the unpredictability of tornadoes. From a scientific perspective, the eastward shift of tornado activity is one of the most fascinating trends of the past 2 decades. Researchers point to the clustering of tornadoes as a particularly worrisome development. While the number of tornado days may be declining, the number of tornadoes per outbreak is rising. This means when storms do occur, they often come in swarms, overwhelming communities and emergency systems. In states unaccustomed to such outbreaks, the devastation can be overwhelming. Scientists continue to study whether climate change is the primary driver, but the evidence is mounting that atmospheric shifts are rewriting the tornado map. Culturally, the spread of tornadoes has reshaped American identity. In Oklahoma, tornadoes are part of life, woven into local law and everyday resilience. In Kentucky, Tennessee, and Georgia, tornadoes are now joining the cultural fabric. Schools conduct regular drills, communities hold preparedness fairs, and families share stories of near misses and survival. The trauma is real, but so is the resilience. Communities band together after each storm, rebuilding and supporting one another. Yet the constant threat takes its toll, leaving people weary of rebuilding again and again, and fearful of when the next funnel might strike. Inequality plays a central role in this story. Low-income families are disproportionately at risk because they often live in mobile homes or poorly constructed housing. Access to underground shelters is limited, and evacuation is not always possible. For many, survival depends not on choice but on circumstance. When tornadoes spread into more states, these inequalities follow, magnifying suffering among those least able to protect themselves. The expansion of tornado risk is not just a scientific issue, it is a social justice issue, exposing how deeply disasters intersect with poverty and inequity. The economic and policy implications are staggering. If tornadoes continue to expand into new states, the cost of damages will rise, straining federal disaster funds and pushing insurers to retreat further. State governments may face tough choices about whether to invest in shelters, enforce stricter building codes, or accept higher risks. Communities will grapple with whether to rebuild in vulnerable areas or relocate entirely. These decisions will shape the future of entire regions, determining which places remain habitable and which may be abandoned. Globally, the US is not alone in facing shifting tornado risks. Europe, Asia, and South America have all reported unusual tornado activity in recent years. The forces driving tornado expansion are part of broader climate shifts affecting the entire planet. America's challenge, then, is part of a global story of adaptation in the face of atmospheric change. What happens in Mississippi or Kentucky resonates far beyond US borders, offering lessons and warnings for other nations confronting new weather extremes. So why are tornadoes appearing in more states than before? The answer is layered. Warmer, wetter air feeding more storms, jet stream shifts creating new instability zones, population growth putting more people in harm's way, and social systems unprepared for the challenge. The pattern is clear. Tornadoes are no longer a regional phenomenon, but a national threat. The old boundaries of Tornado Alley have dissolved, replaced by a new reality in which nearly every state must take tornadoes seriously. The story of expanding tornado risk is a story of America's ability or inability to adapt to a changing world. It raises urgent questions about infrastructure, preparedness, inequality, and resilience. It challenges communities to rethink safety, not as a luxury, but as a necessity. And it confronts the nation with a choice: prepare for the storms of tomorrow, or be devastated by them again and again. At Crisis Lens, we believe understanding these shifts is critical for everyone, not just those who live in traditional tornado zones. Because as tornadoes spread, no community is beyond their reach. The funnel clouds of tomorrow could form over places we least expect. And preparation today could mean survival tomorrow. If you found this deep dive eye-opening, don't stop here. Follow Crisis Lens to stay ahead of the world's most pressing weather and disaster stories. Like this video, share it with friends and family, and most importantly, watch the full series to see how tornadoes, hurricanes, floods, and other disasters are reshaping our world in real time. Together we can ask the hard questions, hold systems accountable, and push for solutions that protect lives. The storms are not waiting, and neither should we.